The Texans take on the Jersey Giants in their preseason opener, and we get to see new jerseys. All that and more on this edition of the Bullpen.
He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to the Bullpen. As always, I'm James Roy, and with me is my trusty co-host, Tom Chavarria, and person who just coined the new segment, JJ Watt Watch. We'll get that to you on Monday, so make sure you're ready. Tom is literally watching JJ Watt's location right now on a side screen. No, just kidding. It's probably the Astros game. But anyways, Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Like I'm saying every show until I can't say it anymore. It is a great time to be a Houston sports fan. Every team you could want to root for right now is playing good quality sports. Even the Rockets are doing summer team get together, bonding, training camp stuff. They're going to be really good. I mean, the Astros are the Astros. They're inevitable. The Dynamo are surprisingly good. And oh, by the way, there's this football team downtown Houston. Maybe you've heard of them, the Houston Texans.
I think I have. Yeah, no. My hat's a dead giveaway. I have heard of the Texans, and I'm excited to see them play. I think that seeing the starters against the Steelers was a good little spark, and we'll keep getting those sparks until finally it's September 8th, and we get to see the Texans go to Indianapolis and, full circle moment going from the end of last regular season into the start of this regular season. But for now, we're stuck with preseason football, and I'm not complaining. Preseason football is so much fun. And we got the Jersey Giants coming down to Houston. There's preseason football in Houston. Be on the lookout this week on social media. I'll be putting out a preseason ticket giveaway for that game. If you want some good seats to the Texans Giants preseason game, just make sure you're following me I believe I'm gonna be doing it on Instagram, so that'll be at M1 Texans fan. But I'm excited. This episode, as has been the theme in the preseason, we talked about it extensively, is mostly going to be about who interests us on the other team and just a continuation of discussions we've already been having. You probably already know pretty well what we feel about most of the team at this point if you've been following the show, but we'll keep telling you. So here goes nothing. Hard to start an episode where the Texans play the Giants without talking about Malik Nabers. If you follow Ari Myrov on Twitter, you probably are intimately familiar with Malik Nabers being a walking highlight reel, a fight starter, just a general all-around, a menace. And Tom, in our Texans Dynasty League, you had the number 1 overall pick in the rookie draft. I had the number 2 overall pick. So I have a particularly invested interest in Malik Nabers being that guy, especially better than Marvin Harrison Jr., who lacks aura and any sort of talent. Just kidding about the talent part, not the aura part. There's been no aura. I don't know how you're saying the word. I've actually never had to say the word aura out loud in a setting where people will get to hear me say it and critique me for it. So please go easy on me. But what are your thoughts from what you've seen from Malik Nabers? Do you think that he may suffer from Danny Dimes being his quarterback? Like, what is your general take on, that situation?
I thought it was incredibly interesting that they were having a hard time getting him the football. Like, no excuse not to just force feed this kid the ball, because he literally makes eye-popping plays all the time, or he did it in college. So why not just sling it in his general direction and hope he pulls it down? But in the preseason, they've struggled to get him the rock. I really saw this as the Devin Singletary revenge game, and that's what I'm interested to see, what he looks like as a Giant. I imagine, every run that he has that is of positive yards, he might, feel some kind of way about the Texans who went a different direction from him, even though he enjoyed success with the Texans.
And I like Devin Singletary as a player. I was kind of hopeful that when they pivoted from the Saquon Barkley move that they might stick with Devin Singletary. Didn't end up working out that way. But when the clip that I referenced earlier of Malik Nabers kind of getting into a fight with the Lions during joint practice, first teammate to run to his aid, and just popping, guns blazing, swinging was Devin Singletary. And I think that encapsulates what we got from Devin Singletary when he's on the team. Just a great teammate and a guy who's there, has your back. He's in there. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table, mainly from the perspective of confirming that this Texans run defense is still what we think it is. Because I think Devin Singletary is a legitimate challenge. You could argue that Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren as a combo were a challenge, but one or the other, I'm not fully convinced on that. So, I'd like to see Devin Singletary challenge this run defense and give us a legit look at how the Texans look defending the run. Other than that, I mean, on offense for the Giants, they've got some questions at left tackle with I can't remember who it was. It was a player that I really wanted the Texans to draft at one point. I think he was from Alabama, Evan Neal. There we go. And I'm not even sure he's playing left tackle for them. I can't say that I'm familiar with which tackle he's playing, but I know that Giants fans just are not super happy with him from what I've gathered. So I'm interested to see if the Texans can exploit that. Defensively, is there any particular area on the Giants defense that you're like, man, I want to see the Texans try and target that, kind of attack it?
I mean, how can you not want CJ to go out there secondary and show off these fancy new toys that he has at wide receiver? I absolutely hope he challenges their corners and he puts the ball in the air at least 10 times in this game. I mean, I don't know that they'll do that if you get Joe Mixon and they want to really feature him and try to open holes for him and try to get the run game going. That may be the move, but I do feel like CJ to Stephon Diggs in a big play would be fantastic for Texan fans out of this game.
100%. And this is a good point to bring up that we record this earlier in the week. So if someone did say anything about who's playing and how much, we wouldn't know it at this point. But what are your guesses on how much the Texans feature the starters in this matchup? We got them for a couple series against the Steelers. Do you think it's a similar run? Do you think maybe we see a little more run from the starters? What are your thoughts on this point relative to traditionally what we see in a preseason, since the Texans are playing 4 preseason games this year?
I really feel like this is a dress rehearsal. I feel like you probably get them for 3 quarters in this game. You probably then turn around the last game and you get them for like a half. And this is going to be the most complete review that we'll be able to have of the team. I think, at least that's what I hope. It could flip-flop the other way, and maybe they do a legit dress rehearsal the last preseason game. But I imagine in years past, the Texans have wanted that last game to really try to iron out the last couple spots on the roster. So you want to give those guys more runs so you can get just another look to see those final wide receiver battles, those final, couple running back spots, even though we kind of feel like we know how it's going to play out. So I assume that's kind of how it's going to go. Obviously, it could go 180 degrees. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough to guess. I mean, if we're looking, the Hall of Fame game kind of throws a loop in it. It felt like the Texans didn't play their starters because they were maybe worried about the Bears getting a look at them before the Week 2 matchup. If we shrink it down to the scope of just preseason, Week 1, 2, and 3, and we compare it to previous format of 4 weeks of the preseason, I think you kind of get a mix mash of what weeks 2 and 3 would look like in the past. So I agree with you that it could be 3 quarters. I think I'm leaning more towards like a whole half of the starters, and then against the Rams, that's when we'll probably see another just backups game. I don't think we need to see much, if anything, from the starters at that point. I think the Texans are going to be looking to see, who's making the roster. We've had lots of in-depth discussions about position battles that are going on that are really deep on the team. So I'd expect to see guys deep on that wide receiver roster, deep in the wide receiver room, and just in general on the Texans get a lot more run. It particularly as it pertains to the defense, do you think that there's anything we're going to see from the linebacker room in this game? Like, is this a matchup you feel like the linebacker room could really show out in? or do you think that it's going to be the same old story in terms of how the depth is performing so far?
I really hope that we get a better performance than we've seen out of the first 2 games. Clearly, there's been some guys missing. Christian Harris hasn't played a lot of football, and you wonder what his status will be for this game. I know the last practice we saw, he left a little gingerly. Much like some of these other players that are dealing with soft tissue injuries on the defensive side of the ball, you really hope they get out there. I'd love to see Kamari Lassiter and Malik Neighbors. I'd love to see that just to get an idea, what he looks like when the lights are on against somebody that's going to be playing on Sundays. You won't have to question whether or not Malik Neighbors will be lined up across from him when I believe the Giants played the Texans during the regular season, correct?
I don't believe they do. If they do, it's in New York, but I think they play the Jets in New York, and I don't think they play the Giants.
Okay, that's who it is. I'm sorry.
This season. They play the Cowboys, so that's a reasonable guess because they're both NFC East, but I don't think that they play the Giants this season. I could be wrong.
No, you're right. I'm looking at it now.
Okay.
They got every other team in New York except the Giants.
That's wild. I like that you brought up the Malik Neighbors versus Kamari Lassiter matchup specifically because of their SEC roots. Both are rookies coming into this class. Kamari Lassiter from Georgia and Malik Neighbors from LSU. And we also look at how Kamari Lassiter reacted when he found out that Coach DeMeco Ryans used to play at Alabama. He was obviously, it kind of sparked a little bit of a little something in him. So I think that'll be a fun matchup to watch. And I hope we can see him in either way, right? You either have that or you have the LSU versus LSU matchup between Derek Stingley and Malik Neighbors. I don't believe they were both at LSU at the same time. That the likelihood that they overlapped is incredibly low. But that alumni thing or just the college conference matchup is always fun to see play out on the field. And like you said, I think it'd be a true test of if what we've said so far this offseason is true about Lassiter, which is that he is he has film speed. Who cares about his 40 time? He can keep up, and we'll see that play out. Now, what do you think the odds are that the pass rush, as it did for a significant portion of last week's game, kind of overshadows the secondary's ability to show out? Like the pass rush just gets there so quick that we don't really see the corners get tested.
I really hope that's the theme all season long. I hope we never have to talk about safeties. I hope we never have to talk about CB2 because, quite frankly, no one can stay in front of Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr., Derek Barnett, Jerry Hughes, whoever's lined up. I hope they're just absolutely unabated to the quarterback all season long. I know that's unrealistic, but I really feel like when you think about the who you double team aspect of those guys that I just named, it's going to be really difficult to game plan to stop both of those guys. So one of them is going to be one-on-one with somebody, and I feel like that's advantage whichever one that is.
100%. And so I think that early on that'll be a thing. And I think that the depth in the Texans D-end room is, I don't want to say underrated, but I don't know if it's talked about enough how deep that room is. So I mean, I don't even think there's really difficult conversations going on at that room. I think that maybe there's people brought in to be training camp bodies and potentially practice squad members, just because of how that room is stacked up. But also looking defensively, right? Is there any other? So we talked about rookies, who's playing what. What about at the safety position? Is there anything that you're eyeballing in terms of what you want to see in this matchup?
Obviously, it's what they are doing with one Jalen Petrie. He's the hot topic of discussion with respect to the safety room, whether or not he's going to be in that star nickel, on the line where it's just they have one safety high, that sort of thing, or he's going to be out in coverage. I believe that Kalen Bullock, while he has flashed some potential, I think there's still some room for him to grow. And I think Jalen Petrie is going to have to play some safety in this defense at times. Will they likely try to get him on the line in that star or that hybrid position that we've talked about all preseason? Absolutely. Will that be the base formation? Probably not.
Yeah, 100%. And then the last question defensively, Is there a specific linebacker that you think has the potential to step up as depth for this team, or is there just really no one that you're tracking outside of the starters in the Texans linebacker room at this point?
It hasn't been good. The linebackers concern me the most out of any roster position or, offense, defense, any position battle that there is. The linebackers for me, if anybody gets hurt, and some people don't even like Henry To'oTo'o, who on the depth chart is a starting linebacker for this team. So when you think about that, then the depth behind him gets progressively worse. So guys like Deshaun Phillips and Jake Hansen and Neville Hewitt are not names that you're like running to tell somebody, man, can't wait to see Neville Hewitt play, even though you're going to have to see him play.
You got to, do it like Hewitt on special teams. You bring up a lot of valid points. I'm hopeful that Neville Hewitt, with as much as he's shown on special teams, finally like shows through as a guy who gets the opportunity to be a top tier depth piece for this team. Do I think that that's shown out so far? I don't know. Not quite. But I mean, like I've asked you before, what are the Texans' options at linebacker if they feel like they need to add depth? Like, I would have to look and comb like a lot of rosters and see who's a cut candidate that could potentially be better than the depth the Texans have. And I'm not sure that answer comes about. So like, in all likelihood, the Texans linebacker room, as it stands, could be close to what we're going to see this season. And so I think the hope is, as we've said many times, that the D'Amico effect kind of takes over and forces one or two of the linebackers to develop into a more serviceable player in the role that's going to be asked of them. And so I look at Neville Hewitt and Jake Hansen as guys who have contributed in other capacities outside of linebacker that probably at least deserve the opportunity to step up based on the fact that there's not really any candidates separating themselves at this point. But that being said, offensively, do you think that the Cade Stover versus Brevin Jordan for tight end 2 debate, I mean, we talked about it earlier in the week in the frame of like, a post-game discussion. But when we talk about that this week, do you think the Texans are looking to solve that? Or do you think that they already know in their heart of hearts who the tight end 2 is going to be?
Well, real quick, back to the linebacker discussion. I really feel like while everyone has tried to spend the remaining cap space that the Texans have on a certain safety that played in Denver named Justin Simmons, I'm really wondering if the reason that isn't a thing is because they are patiently waiting to see what linebackers come free via cut and maybe make a move there with some of those funds to bring in a linebacker that someone deems not worthy on another team, because to me, it looks like that's the thinnest position. While safety isn't sexy, I don't think they lack in the safety room the way they lack in the linebacker room. To get to the tight end question you asked, I haven't seen Brevin Jordan play a snap yet. So for everyone that's already trying to make Cade Stover tight end 2, I think that we need to pump the brakes a little bit and remember that Brevin Jordan was incredibly successful last year in the time that he got to play when Dalton Schultz was down or they went 2 tight end or whatever the case. So for me, I feel very confident what Brevin Jordan can do, love what Cade Stover can do, and I think there's a world where you have 3 tight ends on this team, and it's not necessarily tight end 1, 2, and 3. It's Dalton Schultz and then everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that that 3 tight ends was a given, and I always felt like it was Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover. I think Tegan Kateriano TQ was the most likely to push for the tight end 4 with his injury. I don't know if the Texans carry a 4th tight end. But I mean, I do think a lot of people are discounting what Brevin Jordan brings to the table. So, I mean, with that in mind, it's hard to believe that the Texans aren't already pretty familiar with what they want. I mean, granted, Cade Stover has made an excellent case, right, with what he's done in this preseason for making that 4th round pick that was spent on him incredibly valuable and definitely the right decision. to anyone who may have doubted that that was the case, which I think is very few people. But all in all, I mean, I think that that position is pretty set. We already kind of hinted at it, but Joe Mixon returned to practice on Sunday night, and so in all likelihood, he will play some amount of time. What are you looking to see out of Joe Mixon in this game?
It's really going to be interesting what offensive line he gets. While a lot of people have tried to break down the running back situation while he's been out, 60% of the offensive line has not played with him. So when you have a big chunk of your starting offensive line missing, it's really hard for me to go, well, Dameon Pierce hasn't performed because the numbers don't show it. And no one is opening a hole for him. Now, do I believe he should have better numbers? A little bit. Do I think it's fair to assess him based on what he's had to run behind? No. So in that aspect, I think if you get Laramie Tunsil, if you get Juice Scruggs, if you get who am I missing? Shaq Lawson?
Shaq
Mason, sorry. If you get those guys and they're back, then you start to go, okay, what does this offense look like? What does this run game look like? And then I will start to critique the running back room. Until that point, it just seems unfair to whoever's back there. Even if it's Joe Mixon. If Joe Mixon goes out and he's running behind who do they have? They have Blake Fisher and they have Kendrick Green and Jarrett Patterson out there. I'm not going to be like upset with Joe Mixon if there's nowhere to go.
I mean, I feel for you on that, and I think that the offensive line composition in this matchup will be very important as to whether or not it's worth even looking at. And I guess also, like, even if the composition's not good, and it doesn't look good on the field, Joe Mixon's production, in spite of it, could be a huge plus. But as far as that goes, I think the most important thing to look at is Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs being on the field, because I think that those two guys are going to be the huge difference. The interior O-line, Shaq Mason looked good, but the rest of it was kind of a revolving door, and at times didn't show up in the way that might have, been more fun for Texans fans to watch. So that's a big thing I'm looking at. Any other discussions we could have about the offense going into this game? We've already pretty much had at this point. So I wanted to lead off on one note. I just remembered something I was going to say earlier with the linebacker discussion, and that is this. A lot of people dogged me when I very heavily featured a linebacker going in the first 3 rounds of the draft to the Texans, between Jeremiah Trotter, Edrin Cooper, any number of linebackers that I projected the Texans. There was a lot of people that did not like that, and probably still wouldn't like that. But I'll tell you this, that the depth in that linebacker room, as I said throughout the draft process for the Texans, is going to be an issue unless someone steps up who's on the roster, or there is a cut at the late part of the preseason by someone else that the Texans pick up to fill that role. So I am by no means wishing the Texans to do poorly at that position. I would love nothing more than to see someone step up and for linebacker to be one of the more rock steady positions for the Texans. But it's a simple fact that is definitely the most deeply concerning position on the team for the Texans. So with that in mind, Tom, do you have anything else to say before we go, into this game against the Giants?
I really just hope we get a thorough examination of a complete Texan roster. We've been teased with bits and pieces like every game. And for me, when we get the starting 11 that is going to be the starting 11 on both sides of the football, then you can really kind of lean forward in your chair and kind of assess, okay, how's this team going to look going into week 1, as opposed to going, it's really hard to critique what Davis Mills is doing or Ben Skoranek is doing, because do I necessarily feel like either one of those is going to be playing a lot of minutes? Absolutely not. So I need to know what, the Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Steph Diggs is going to look like. I need to know if when Tank scores like he did last week, is Steph going to love it like he did? I need to see those things.
He was celebrating before Tank Dell scored.
And I want that. You know what I mean? I want to see CJ spread the ball all around. I want to see this run game do something with an offensive line that actually is a starting offensive line and not, 2 starters and 3 guys that, probably are fighting for a roster spot.
Pretty much hit the nail on the head. I mean, I don't know. I'm just excited for more Texans football, even if it is kind of filler until September 8th. But I'm here for it. I'm here for seeing some Texans football. As always, thanks for tuning in. I said earlier on the show, I'll say it again. If you're not following me on Instagram, make sure you're doing that so that you could have a shot at these preseason tickets for the Texans-Giants matchup. I have been James Roy, and you can find me on Instagram at M1TexansFan. You can find me on Twitter at JamesRoyNFL, and you can find Tom at TCTom1 on Instagram and at Third Coast Tom on Instagram. Or sorry, not Instagram, Twitter. Got a little.
I only have one Instagram.
You only have one Instagram.
James is the one that has 73 of them.
If you use my Twitter username to find an Instagram, you will find me still because I have that.
Soon, N1 Texans ping pong coming soon.
There you go. I played in a pretty intense ping pong tournament on vacation this past weekend. I ended up getting second place. So shout out to my mother-in-law. She is really good at ping pong. Tough to beat. I kept it close, but couldn't quite get the victory there. But yeah, as always, thanks for watching. Stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.